Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Pretty bad.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What's the problem?
Well, there are two things. There's a lot of pollen in the air, and pollen
Here too. You can see it.
Pollen has really bad effects on me. It makes me stupid, for one thing.
Oh.
And it generally sours my view of the world. It has mental effects as well as physical effects. It turns out when you can't breathe, your body freaks out.
Yeah.
So there's that. So expect a low cognitive level today. And second is comprehensive immigration reform is still alive.
Boy, that's quite a 1-2 punch there. At first the pollen, these little particles everywhere, and then all of these little people streaming across the border overwhelming you, Mickey. That's a lot to take.
Don't mock me.
I'm not. You know what I discovered, Mickey, reading your blog recently, is you do have kind of an interest in this immigration thing, don't you?
Right, although it's on the New York Times most searched list, it beat out sex, so I'm just going for the hits. I did have a gratuitous Lindsay Lohan item.
Yeah, she had a little auto mishap, I guess.
But that and that did give me a lot of hits. But maybe they were hits for immigration. You never know.
You never do with your platform.
So anyway, I just think this is a piece of legislation that's a disaster for the country, and you know, the scales have fallen from my eyes about Bush. He's an idiot.
Really?
He's
Bush?
Leading our country over the cliff. This is the equivalent, the domestic equivalent of the Iraq War. It's a idée fixe he had from the beginning. He's pursuing it rigidly. He hasn't thought it through. It's based entirely on wishful thinking, and it's a sort of sincere but stupid gut level feeling that hey, you know, it's that somehow it's racist not to just let all these people in, just as it was racist to assume that, gee, the Iraqis couldn't have a democracy just as much as the West Europeans, and the result, you know, is going to be a debacle.
Okay. But aside from that, you're for it. I mean, I have a question about this, though. Will it make things worse than they are? I mean, for example, will it increase the number of people coming across the border?
Of course, because if you know the people that snuck across the border since 1986 will be winners. They will be rewarded with instant legalization and eventually citizenship. Plus, in the interim, they got to be in America working and sending money home to their families. So they're big winners. They were rewarded for crossing the border with this legalization, whatever you want to call it. The question isn't, is it amnesty? The question is, are they rewarded for it? And it's even if they have to pay a small fine, it's a great deal for them. Well, so other future people will want to get the same deal, and they'll sneak across the border, and the result of the semi-amnesty, as I call it, will be a vast new wave of amnesty-seeking immigrants.
Okay, wait. So you're assuming that there will be these really significant, first of all, incentive effects, okay?
Right, which has happened in Europe wherever amnesty's been tried. It's been followed by more immigration. In fact, Sarkozy is the one who said, let's stop giving all these amnesties. All it's doing is encouraging more immigration.
The way the law reads, of course, the people coming across the borders next would not qualify, as the law reads, right? You have to have been in the country before January 1st.
That's right. No, first, they don't qualify, but it's easy to forge the documents to qualify if you come really quickly in the next year. Second, of course, they don't qualify, but so they wait around, and then in 10 years, there are too many of them to deport, and they qualify for the next amnesty.
Well,
and that's
if they make that assumption. I mean, another thing is you're calling it a trivial fine or a tiny fine. You know, it's actually not to them, I think. I mean, to you, maybe whatever it is, $5,000 is nothing. It's not to me, first of all, but it's certainly not to them.
It's not to them, and a lot of them won't pay it because it is a lot of money to them, and living in the shadows actually isn't that bad, and it's not worth it to them to legalize for $5,000.
Well, wait, if working in the shadows isn't that bad, then how strong can the incentive effect be, right? I mean, that's what I was going to say was, look, I'm not sure. I mean, to them, I think the story over in Mexico or wherever now is, look, you go across, you work, nobody bothers you. That's what they're being told now. And it seems to me after this law, what they're going to be told is, look, you go across, you work, and nobody bothers you. And you've just confirmed that by saying that in their eyes there's not a huge difference between living in the shadows and having official...
You didn't let me finish my sentence, Bob. They're going to lower the fine. When 10% of the people sign up, they're going to say, oh, $5,000 was too much. We're going to lower it to $1,000. We're going to lower it to $500.
But you did just say...
The whole goal is to legalize the illegal population, so they're going to lower it to whatever it takes. And they're going to be told if you go across the border, everybody will leave you alone, and you have the option of legalizing and becoming a citizen.
But you just said that to them that distinction is not a big deal, right?
Sorry?
Or did I misunderstand you?
I'm saying it wasn't worth $5,000, but it's a nice option to have, isn't it?
I guess. I mean, to me...
especially when they lower the fine to $500.
Well, I doubt they're sitting there assuming that's going to happen. I mean, I personally think...
Oh, definitely the left, the Democrats are assuming that's going to happen. I mean, the local congressman has said, look, just do whatever it takes to pass this bill, and we'll deal with the level of the fines and the family reunification and everything later.
I personally think the way they're thinking this, that the whole incentive structure is just a lot murkier on that side of the border to begin with. That it seems like if you get across, you're okay now, and you'll be okay in 5 years, and whatever. But I don't know for sure. You're just assuming this kind of highly, you're in this very abstract kind of game theoretical mode, and I'm not sure it applies. Well, the other thing is you dismiss the possibility, I think, that anything in this bill could appreciably strengthen the policing of the borders, right?
Well, let me answer your first thing first. First, in the welfare area, it turns out that people actually did respond to exactly this sort of what you call abstract game theoretical. The incentives maybe for going on welfare in the short term weren't good, but in the long term they paid attention to whether down the road the government was going to make you work or not. Okay, they had a very intelligent, rational view of what were the effects of going on welfare and what were not the effects, and if when the government got serious about welfare, they got off welfare. So I think people do respond to these incentives. They're not as stupid as people think they are.
Well, no, it's not a question of stupidity. It's a question of what their aspirations are. You yourself said, Mickey, to them there's not a huge difference between living in the shadows and amnesty. You said that. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's not about their stupidity. It's about how much information is available to them and what are their aspirations. And it has not been established to my satisfaction that these will have huge incentive effects given those considerations.
I think the other thing, Bob, is the last time we did it, that's exactly what happened. It's certainly not an argument for amnesty not having these incentive effects that the last time we tried it, we were faced with a huge wave of new illegal immigrants. I would say that establishes a sort of rebuttable presumption that the same thing will happen again. It has happened.
And when was this?
We're not talking about theory. We're talking about what has happened.
And when was this?
After 86.
After 86. Okay, so now it's nearly 20 years down the road, and no catastrophe has ensued. People like you are warning that if this continues, there will be a catastrophe, but the empirical fact is that after what you're calling a massive increase in immigration beginning nearly 20 years ago, or beginning more than 20 years ago, there is no catastrophe.
I'd say Bush is the one who's saying it's such a catastrophe we have to do something. There were 3 million illegals in 1986. We amnestied. Now there are 12.
And where is the catastrophe?
12, maybe there'll be 24. It's not a risk worth taking.
And where is the catastrophic effect that's welled up over the last 20 years from this huge increase?
Well, the catastrophic effect is that low wages at the bottom in America have stayed stagnant or gone down. Bob, aren't you one of the people who laments that?
I do, but what's puzzling to me, I mean, you always defend I will put the word obsession in quotes because you wouldn't call it an obsession, but your interest in immigration by saying that this is one of your prime concerns, and I think you acknowledge that the other one is that you're actually afraid that they'll, take over California or something. I mean, it's almost...
Bob, what would happen if we had open borders? We would have a society like Latin America where the wages on the bottom sucked, where there were vast inequalities of Brazil-style inequalities of wealth, so the social equality was impossible, and we would have a southwest of America swamped by Mexicans and Latinos, and it seems to me that has potentially adverse political consequences, given that children in Mexico are apparently taught that we stole, probably correctly, that we stole the land from them in 1848. So they might want it back.
Right. I know that that is one of your concerns.
But it is one of my concerns. Why is that a crazy concern?
I'm not saying it is. What I was going to question is the idea that your other professed concern, the effect on American wages, is really such a prominent part of your calculus. Because if it is, why aren't you against free trade?
Well, it seems to me that we're pushing it with free trade, and we can't have both free trade and free immigration, because that will totally screw our underclass.
Well, why don't you argue in favor of some modest tariffs that would at least roll back free trade? I mean, the fact is you spend no time at all writing about free trade being an evil, and, you know...
Well, it seems to me that there are enough jobs that can't be exported that if we had immigration control, there would be the labor market at the bottom would be sufficiently tight so that employers would be bidding up wages. I mean, you're right. Maybe I should. It just seems to me the deadweight efficiency loss of stopping free trade is so high that I sort of don't want to confront it.
I'm not sure about that. There's definitely an aggregate efficiency gain in letting low-wage workers into our country. I mean, the situations are actually quite analogous. I mean, free trade, what free trade does is to allow you to exploit low-wage workers in other countries in two realms, manufacturing and services that can be performed abroad. What open immigration does is do the exact same thing for services that cannot be performed abroad. They're actually quite analogous, and if you're concerned about the wage effects, it seems to me...
I thought there's a huge deadweight loss in stopping free trade from denying nations their comparative advantage, which isn't always just...
Well, you know, you're denying a comparative advantage. One of the main comparative advantages you're denying if you deny free trade is the wage gap, is the fact that these people will work for low wages. And that's what you're doing with immigration.
But it's not the only comparative advantage. And if you're worried about the political thing, I'd rather have the Mexicans get rich in Mexico than have, Southern California be the... focus of the Aztlan separationist movement.
Well, okay, it just does seem to me that if you look at your positions on these two issues, that is actually your overwhelming concern, which is okay. You're honest that it's your concern.
You're arguing that I should also be a protectionist. Okay, well, I'll consider that.
If your concern about American wages is so intense as to warrant, the amount of ink you've spilt on immigration, or even 50% of that. In other words, if it's one of your two primary concerns in immigration, then yes, you should be spending some time opposing free trade.
It's one of my three concerns.
What?
It's one of my three concerns. Look,
what's the third one?
I work very hard for welfare reform. We've been through this. Welfare reform helped, women in the so-called underclass. It has not helped men. What will help the men is if employers are really eager for their services and will hire the guy who's maybe marginal and pay him a decent wage and train him and socialize him to get him back in the mainstream. That's not going to happen if there are hundreds of thousands of immigrants.
Okay, that's a good counter to my question then, that services that can be performed in America are especially ripe targets for the employment of underclass people, and that kind of manufacturing has kind of gone for good, and they're not going to get jobs in the financial services sector and so on. That's your argument.
Yeah.
I'm glad I helped you clarify that.
Well, how is that? But why couldn't I also argue that? Why couldn't you also argue that protectionism would preserve jobs that are?
Well, no, but protectionism preserves jobs in two categories: manufacturing and services that can be performed abroad. If your argument is that here in America, those industries are not especially ripe opportunities for the Americans you're concerned about, then you could justify your special emphasis on immigration as a way to keep wages of Americans up. You understand?
No, I understand, but you're saying that it's crazy to be opposed trade on the grounds that you're going to save unskilled manufacturing jobs?
Wait, am I saying it's crazy to be opposed to free trade?
In other words, you're saying that the trade does not in any way destroy unskilled manufacturing jobs, or there's no way to get them back, or?
No, it does. I was just...
What were the two categories that it facilitates?
Free trade is relevant to services that can be performed abroad, But those tend to be kind of white collar or else kind of data entry type positions, and manufacturing. Whereas immigration is relevant to services that can be performed here, gardening, working at fast food restaurants.
Well, I'd take manufacturing jobs too if I could get them. But the point is, so if I thought trade would actually save our manufacturing jobs without a huge deadweight efficiency loss, maybe I would be. If I thought blocking trade would do that, maybe I'd be for blocking trade.
Okay. Well, anyway, the justification of your disproportionate emphasis on immigration compared to trade seems he must lie in this careful distinction among these three categories.
Well, it takes away unskilled jobs from from the people who are already here, and the people who need them are the underclass poor. An unskilled job is an unskilled job. I don't really care if it's in services or manufacturing.
Okay, well, anyway.
And the people that pour across the border are unskilled people who are competing with our unskilled people. That's the problem.
I understand that part of the argument. My final question is about, you dismiss the idea that anything in this bill apparently will appreciably increase border enforcement. For example, in your blog, you made fun of the idea that these three unmanned aerial reconnaissance...
There are four, Bob. There are four unmanned aerial drones.
And you don't think that could be significant?
No.
Well, here's what it... I haven't done the research.
I think a fence might be slightly significant.
I haven't done the research, but here's what I'm imagining, is that, like, the kinds of planes that have a person in them are loud and big. So if I'm somebody coming across the border illegally, my strategy is to keep looking up at the sky, and if I see a loud, big airplane, I kind of duck under a bush or something. Whereas these little unmanned airplanes, first of all, they're very, I assume that in the long run they're going to be much cheaper and easier to deploy. Secondly, they're much smaller and quieter. So it seems to me they might do a much better job of actually monitoring the situation.
They might be effective, but you still need the Border Patrol people to go get the people. It seems to be a fence that just sits there through all 2,000 miles will be more effective. We're talking about 4 airplanes for a 2,000-mile border, Bob.
Well, right, but if they work, we can make it 8, 12, 24, 100, right?
Well, why not build a fence and have that be around the clock with cameras?
I think it's cheaper and easier to probably deploy 50 of these things, and among them they could probably do a lot of border policing. My point is, you made fun of this and dismissed it in your blog, and have you really thought it through? Are you really sure these things won't help?
I didn't say it wasn't an advance. I say that it will be overwhelmed by the incentive effect of people pouring across the border to get the next amnesty. It seems to me we should do both. We should have our 4 drones, and also we want to send the signal to Latin America, no mas, that access to America is now closed. You can do it with drones, you can do it with a fence, and above all, you do it by not giving amnesty to the people who made it before. And then once we stop the flow, then maybe we can, let some of the people out of the shadows. I mean, I'm
not sure. No mas is really the phrase you want to use. You know the most famous deployment of that phrase?
Roberto Duran.
Yeah, he was getting the hell kicked out of him, and it was a way of surrendering. It wasn't an assertive declaration. He said, "No mas, I give up."
Okay, well, you're right. Maybe I should hit on a different phase. And
also, so I win the whole argument.
It also seems to me we want a lot of legal immigrants from that part of the world, but we just want them to be legal so we can control it. Anyway,
so 18 minutes in your world is not nearly enough time on immigration. In my world, it's at least enough. Can we compromise and move on to another aspect of the subject?
I actually want to make one more point.
Surprise.
There's an interesting split on the right. It seems to me the key split is between, are you comfortable with a lot of social inequality? In other words, are you comfortable with a Latin America situation where there are a lot of poor people around who could be your servants, and you live with vast inequalities of wealth and class? So there's a shanty town across town, and there are plenty of people to water your lawn and be your maid, and you're surrounded by servants. Or do you prefer what we have now in America, which is very few servants and basic social equality? There are people on the right, bizarrely, who you wouldn't think it, who are opting for social equality. And I'm talking about people like, you know who, Bob, a certain blonde woman who has come out against this bill. It turns out she values social equality, and the people in the Wall Street Journal...
Turns out that's what she says, you mean? Turns out that's what she's saying?
I think she really does.
Well, you would know better than I would.
That's correct. And And people at the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch are happy with the situation where there are plenty of servants. And it seems to me that's the key dividing line that's coming out. And, some people on the right may be for social equality in terms of they think a certain ethnic homogeneity is necessary for that, too.
Well, these jobs aren't going to go away. I mean, other people will fill them, right?
Well, right, but if the
it's better if they're black than if they're Hispanic?
It's certainly better if they're black than if they're
Well,
Hispanic.
no, but you still then have like an ethnic correlation with the social stratification. I mean, not just the social stratification.
The wage will be so high that people won't be able to afford lots of servants. By better black if Hispanic, I mean better citizen than non-citizen. Not that.
Okay, although it does seem to me that the idea of whatever this quasi-amnesty would be, part of the idea is to elevate their social stature so that it's a less subservient position they're occupying in society.
And if I didn't think they would be followed by another wave of people who were illegal and didn't have that social stature, I'd be all for it.
Yeah, but if that stature remains a stepping stone to something better, I'm not sure how concerned I'd be. But anyway, Murdoch.
No, but it seems to me if you have a servant class as of a distinct race, you really run the risk of creating a class system.
Well, although you just said it's better if they're blacks than Hispanics, and so.
But in part that's because I don't think there would be a servant class if it was blacks.
Okay.
It wouldn't be a servant class if the borders were closed. It's the endless supply of new low-wage workers that makes it.
Well, just quickly, is this thing going to pass or not? And would it hurry up and do whatever it's going to do so that I won't have to talk about it anymore?
No, this is going to drag on till August.
Oh.
What? If you write your senator, Bob, and kill the bill now...
I'm not going to do that.
Then you'll escape. Then you won't have to debate me about it again. I think you should. Why won't you write your senator?
Well, you do know your incentive effects, Mickey. That was very powerful.
Why won't you contact your senator?
That really... Because I'm not opposed.
Why aren't you opposed?
Mickey, haven't we been talking about this for like now 20 minutes? 22?
We've been talking about my views. What about your views?
I mean, honestly, I haven't looked into it that deeply. Whenever I hear about it, I'm just not alarmed. I'm sorry.
You think the enforcement part's going to work? The drones are going to keep people out?
I just don't imagine this increasing the wave of, on balance, when you think about, what things like that will do, whatever money they're going to spend on border enforcement, and how the incentive structure will actually change in the minds of people on the other side of the border. I do not imagine this increasing the wave appreciably, no.
You're living in a dream world. In every village in South America, they're going to be saying they're giving amnesty in the United States, and some member of that family is going to pack up and come here.
Well, we'll see.
Jesus. Okay.
But anyway, there's another aspect of this you want to complain about, I think, which moves us...
I was just struck by the extent to which you would ordinarily think that Fox News Channel, which is the voice of the ranting right, would be all over this because the right is very exercised, especially Fox viewers, and they were, and Fox was all over it until about Tuesday of last week, when all of a sudden the issue disappeared from the airwaves.
And were you the first to note this?
No, the National Review actually noticed that on Brit Hume's show they had a debate about Bush's immigration reform with three people who were for it, and it seemed like that was sort of a
couldn't that just be Brit Hume?
It could just be Brit Hume.
Were you the first person to extrapolate and see in it an entire network-wide conspiracy?
Well, it's weird. John Boehner, the Republican minority leader in the House, said that Bush, he called it a piece of S blank blank T bill. Said Bush had asked him as a favor to keep quiet about the piece of S blank blank T bill, while at this sensitive time. So I figured if Bush asked Boehner, maybe Bush asked Murdoch. Then it turns out that Murdoch, who controls Fox, had actually written a piece for the Wall Street Journal in 2004 where he basically came out in favor of Bush-style immigration reform. So maybe he didn't even have to be asked. Maybe Murdoch just said, I'm for this bill. I don't want people on my network talking about it. And he put the clamp down as opposed to as a favor for Bush. I was originally thinking that Ailes would do, who runs the network for Murdoch, would do it as a favor for Bush. I don't know if I was the first, but I became completely paranoid about it late last week when I saw this pattern developing where Fox shows that we're supposed to be talking about amnesty, we're instead talking about Rosie O'Donnell and The View, or John Edwards' haircut for the 15th time. And finally, Ann Coulter went on TV and rebelled against it and just decided to talk about immigration even though that wasn't the topic, and they cut away from they never went back to her after she did that.
It's a good thing we've got her.
Absolutely.
So what does this say about Murdoch's ideology? I mean, so at a minimum, we can say he is not obsessively right-wing in this regard the way he is. I infer he is obsessively hawkish. I mean, when it comes to, like, invading Iraq, all of his media outlets speak with a single voice. Fox, New York Post, Weekly Standard.
They have to. That's until he tilts toward Hillary in the presidential race, which is what everybody thinks he's going to do. The problem with Murdoch isn't that he's left or right. The problem is that he runs a top-down, one-man operation where when he gives the word, the entire operation switches and blacks out a subject as if it was Kim Il-jung's North Korea.
Wait, you're saying Murdoch is neither left nor right?
No, I'm saying it doesn't matter. What's bad about him is that he interferes with editorial decisions and he doesn't let a diversity of views naturally filter up in his media organizations. We worked at the New Republic. Marty Peretz had strong views about Israel. That doesn't mean you couldn't get a contra-review in the magazine. Murdoch, it means you can't get a contra-review on his whole damn TV network.
Well, okay, but it does begin with the fact that he has this ideology. He is right-wing. You're denying that Rupert Murdoch is right-wing?
I'm saying of course he's right-wing, but you seem to be saying that the important issue is whether he's right-wing or left-wing. I'm saying the important issue is whether he's an interfering autocrat, and the answer is he is.
Well, I'm not denying that he may be. I'm just trying to sketch out his actual ideology, given what a powerful person he is.
I actually don't know. Most people seem to feel that he's going to go for Hillary. I don't know what that means. Maybe he likes Hillary.
Given his manifest devotion to hawkishness in foreign policy, that would confirm some fears about Hillary on the left, I would say.
Well,
he's not going to give up that issue, Mickey.
I don't know that he cares that much about hawkishness in foreign policy.
Well, it's one thing where all his media outlets speak with a single voice.
Well, but
whereas immigration, as we've just said, is different.
That could just be the lowest common denominator he has to use to unite his flock. I just don't know.
Well, anyway, this is a good assignment for somebody. Could we sketch out Murdoch's actual personal ideology? I haven't seen it done anywhere, right?
I'm sure you could find it. I'm sure it's been done.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay.
But Murdoch is doing your handiwork by opening up China to impersonal market forces at some cost to human rights.
But see, I don't think that is an ideological thing with him. That is wanting his satellite TV in China or something, right?
But I think,
in fact, the Weekly Standard, his magazine, does not, on matters of China, it's like pro-human rights and anti.
But I think he's made the argument, and there's a Jack Schaefer article in Slate where he does make the argument that it was more important to get satellite TV into China in terms of promoting freedom there than it was to have the BBC on the network.
Well, of course he makes the argument, just as Ann Coulter made the argument that she's for social equality, and that's what drives her right-wing immigration stance. I think we have to distinguish between the arguments people make and their actual motivations sometimes.
Yes, but in Coulter's case, I sensed a deep wellspring of feeling.
And as I said before, you're positioned to know. But but it's a matter of record that the Weekly Standard, his magazine, has long put a different emphasis on issues in China.
That's a good point. But anyway, I was just trying to get you to agree with him on one thing.
I don't think that's an ideological matter with him, so I don't think we have ideological alignment between me and him there.
Okay.
I mean, like many capitalists, he's probably vaguely, pro-free trade at heart.
Do you want him to take over the Wall Street Journal or not?
Well, it depends on whether he would so damage it that its right-wing editorial page would lose influence. It would be okay with me if that happened.
He's clearly going to destroy, for good or ill, the little cabal of Robert Bartley types at the Wall Street Journal editorial page. They're not going to be any more editorials. Who is Vince Foster against Hillary Clinton. Even if he's not for her, he's going to put an end to that.
Where do you get this Hillary Clinton thing about Murdoch and Clinton?
It's pretty common knowledge. I can put up a link to a Gawker item that talks about exactly when he is thought to have been won over by Hillary.
And what's the motivation for him
He
there?
did the same thing to Blair. He did the same thing with Blair in England. I don't know what the motivation is. I assume Hillary can do a lot of good for him as a senator from New York for his business interests.
Well, again, it may just confirm left-wing fears about her foreign policy if they're really getting along well.
Anyway,
is there more about Murdoch? Now, this could be a natural transition to this little China thing we wanted to talk about.
Well, let's do it.
Okay, let's do China and then Iraq.
I'm sorry I got so exercised, Bob.
Did you get exercised?
Yeah, I think I'm going to look like a ranting maniac when people...
You're going to look like Bob for once?
Yes.
That would be great. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Okay, anytime.
Can I say anything else to antagonize you?
You probably can, but why don't you talk about China?
Well, I guess this story actually didn't make much of a splash so far as it's about China sentenced this guy to death for, corruption. Ostensibly, he's like a government official who was corrupt and was sentenced to death. And I was actually going to kind of, in a certain sense, defend this, and I thought that might be controversial. But I don't sense China being widely condemned for this so far, are they? Do you feel like condemning them?
No, I assume most pet owners whose pets were poisoned by Chinese melamine would be perfectly happy to see this guy put to death.
Well,
I assume that this is all a stunt to try to convince the world that they're serious about confronting the problem of tainted Chinese goods.
I'm not sure, actually. The indictment of him happened... This guy is the equivalent of the head of the FDA in China.
Right.
And recently there's been this thing with tainted pet food and so on that I guess would come under his auspices. But the actual indictment of this guy long predates this controversy, okay? And it's true he was sentenced to death now, but who knows? But I mean, what I was going to say was, if you read this story in the New York Times about the number of people who have died possibly as a result of his corruption. I mean, small Chinese drug makers have long been accused of manufacturing phony or substandard drugs and marketing them to the nation's hospitals and pharmacies. And then there are these specific cases of tainted stuff that have led to dozens of deaths and so on. I mean, it just seems to me, if you accept the death penalty, if you accept that the death penalty is okay in cases of murder, I was just going to say, well, why not in this case, right?
He's Orson Welles in The Third Man.
I didn't see that, but he is what is that analogy?
Orson Welles sells tainted penicillin in Vienna in The Third Man.
And there was a famous case here years ago where a pharmacist was watering down cancer drugs, selling cancer patients drugs that weren't going to do the job so that he could sell more of them and make more money. I would say if murder warrants a death penalty, that guy should be killed. If murder warrants a death penalty. It's a separate argument.
I assume that the entire Chinese bureaucracy is corrupt and this sort of charge could be brought against any of them.
Well, I guess the reason I thought I might get more flack from that was that, there is this history of various interest groups wanting to make the most they can out of seeming, human rights violations or coarseness in China. I mean, one thing I was in more of a minority position on years and years ago was... Do you remember the whole thing when China was harvesting somebody in China, I guess with government complicity, harvesting the organs of executed prisoners and selling them or something? Remember that?
Right.
And I said, if you're if you're the person who gets the kidney and it would not have been available otherwise, is this necessarily a bad thing? And then people would say, but you have to understand, some of the people being executed are political prisoners. They didn't deserve to die. And I would say, well, then it seems to me the real problem is the execution in the first place. Relatively speaking, the subsequent removal of the kidney is a relatively minor infringement on the dignity of the person compared to killing them in the first place.
It creates an incentive to err on the side of killing them.
Well, that was the good question. Was it increasing the number of people who were executed? That I admit was a valid question.
It seems to me the interesting thing here is China has this sort of state-run capitalist system, and we assume that they were being wildly successful because we all use their goods. But it turns out that that there are reasons why state-run capitalist systems don't work very well, and one is they're subject to corruption, and you don't have the self-policing mechanisms to weed out poisonous dog food, for example, that you do in a market system where any company that did that would be in deep trouble, at least in theory.
But in this case, the market is what punished them, the global market.
The global market, but without the corruption and the dictatorship of the ex-proletariat there, the domestic market would have punished them.
Yeah, I do think there's more and more internal feedback as well. But you're right that it's a relatively statist capitalist economy, and I think it's amazing they've kept it on track as well as they have, given the fact that it is so kind of top down in its control. On the other hand, China historically, over the millennia, I think has more success than any region of space in the history of the universe in keeping, in terms of the vastness of the space that is kept under centralized rule, century after century, with some degree of turbulence, but still, keeping something that big intact, I think they hold the record. And so maybe there's something in the culture that is built up that allows them to do this kind of top-down control thing. There were feedback mechanisms even then, in imperial China over the years, but not, anyway.
All right, it's a Bob Wright point. It's that, market forces are tending to make things better and better and converge on the Teilhard de Chardin mind meld at the end of history.
Well, but in this case, again, they've done it to some extent without the market feedback mechanisms. But I do see them kicking in more and more.
The point is that they're going to have to make their goods safer, and they're going to become more and more like a modern capitalist economy and less like a communist.
I guess what I would say is their ruling elite seem to be more wise and far-seeing, or more far-seeingly concerned with the welfare of their country than, say, Russia's elites, given the way they're behaving right now. That's what I'd say.
Fair enough.
Now, Iraq. We wanted to do Iraq, right?
We wanted to do Iraq, yeah.
Now, am I right that the conventional wisdom has kind of, the surge started a few months ago or something, and you would come on and we would do this and you would say there's some signs that the surge is working, and I would look at them and go, yeah, could be. And it seems that the conventional wisdom was certainly not for the first few months, this is failing, right? It seems to me now the conventional wisdom kind of is that, this is failing, or am I oversimplifying this?
Well, it's starting to shift. There was a very good article in the LA Times, which I recommend people read, about how we're lowering our expectations for what's going to be done by September. And it basically said that sort of none of the three big national political objectives, which is an oil deal, provincial elections, and a de-Baathification, are going to be achieved by September. So the national government isn't going to get it together. It did think that there are successes at the local level, as in Anbar province, and the Anbar model is spreading. And there's some quotes from Frederick Kagan, who argues that it can't, he was sort of one of the fathers of the surge, that it can spread everywhere except Baghdad, because in Baghdad the tribal ties aren't strong enough. The Anbar thing is all enforced through the tribes that have turned against Al-Qaeda, and that you can't do that in Baghdad. So basically the surge is succeeding everywhere except where it's being applied, which is in Baghdad. And in Baghdad, the body count of sectarian killings is going up, but if you read the Washington Post story that describes how it has started to rise again, it's still way below what it was pre-surge. In other words, now it's risen to 321 a month or 330. Last fall, in September 2006, it was 1782 a month.
Wait, so that's what, found bodies?
Found bodies on the streets, yeah.
On the other hand, there's more people getting blown up where you don't have to hunt for the bodies, right?
Well, right, but the horrible thing about people getting blown up is then the Shiites retaliate and start leaving Sunnis on the streets.
Well, no, right, but it seems to me that
if that's not happening, that's a good thing.
Well, right, but if the total, but it seems to me a big question is, what is the total civilian death toll in Baghdad? And to calculate that, you have to add in the number of people who are getting blown up.
No, the big question is is there a cycle of violence that's going to get worse and worse and worse, or is it going to get better and better?
Well,
and if
blowing up
if there's just a few car bombs and there's no retaliation, then arguably, eventually we'll wipe out the car bombers and it'll get better. If there's mounting sectarian casualties, then, I don't see what stops it other than pure ethnic cleansing.
Well, car bombs are sectarian casualties.
Well, right, but it seems to me that if the Shiites don't respond in kind, then you don't have an ever-worsening cycle.
Right, but the dynamic you just described, which is growth in the number of kind of Shiite retail killings over the last few months, suggests that what is exactly happening is that the surge didn't stop these like mostly Sunni kind of car bombs, and the retaliation you would expect is indeed kicking in.
But it's still 350 compared with 1,700.
Although I also heard that the number of missing and unaccounted for, this is something I read about a month ago, that since January, the number of missing and unaccounted for had grown month by month.
That may be true, but anyway, the numbers aren't the story. The story is that when we started the surge, the army retreated, and the question is, will it come back and resume sectarian killing?
Well,
that's the big issue. It's not sort of some sort of...
No, I think the total civilian deaths in Baghdad is a huge part of the issue.
No, but that's what will drive it. That's what will kick it back up to 1,700 and complete the ethnic cleansing, is if the Sadr forces decide to start doing it again.
Well,
the answer is I don't know whether they're going to start doing it again.
Well, if more bodies are piling up every month, I've got a clue, but it could be somebody else doing it.
But Bob, you know that the standard thing is that it goes down, then it ticks up a bit, and the press says, oh, it started to rise again. But the question is, will it keep rising to the levels it was before? And it's still way below the levels it was before.
I still say the quantity to track is total number of civilian casualties in Baghdad, and that's not what you're talking about right now.
Right, I actually don't know what the answer is for total
I know.
numbers. Well,
but it's higher than it's more alarming than the number you're describing when you add in people blown up and people missing and unaccounted for. That's for sure.
But we don't know if it's worse than before.
No, we don't.
And the gist of these press accounts were, Bush said to look at sectarian killings and they're rising again. Well, they're rising again, but they're still better than it was before.
No, but in a way, the most alarming thing is the way Bush himself is recalibrating expectations. Right? I mean, you remember originally when the surge started a few months ago, did they say September or did they say fall? There was some official reckoning, Petraeus talked about it. Everybody said, well, by this time, okay, we'll look at the metrics and we'll know, right? Was this September or what? September or autumn more generally?
Everybody sort of decided September.
Okay. Well, here's what Bush said last week. We're going to expect heavy fighting in the weeks and months ahead. We can expect more American and Iraqi casualties. It could be a very difficult August. August, that's an interesting month for him to warn us about, since right now it's only May, right? I mean, you would expect him to say, could be a bloody June, maybe July. The fact that he's already trying to lower expectations about what the metrics will look like at the end of August suggests to me that he, who is in a position to know, or have more information than we do, does not think things are looking good.
He's just trying to distract attention from comprehensive immigration reform.
Well, once again, your grand unifying theory brings all details into alignment.
But it just seems to me that the one possibility that's the most likely possibility is the one that the American people are least prepared for, which is that the most moral and less sort of deadly thing to do in September will be to keep on doing exactly what we're doing and take in 100 casualties a month, as opposed to leaving and having there be a massive bloodbath or doing something else. And that's exactly what people aren't prepared for, that the war was such a disaster that there's nothing to do but plod straight ahead for another 5 years, as General Zinni, who I sort of tend to defer to, recommends.
No, they're not prepared to do that, and partly that's just kind of a visceral revulsion against us being in this grinding, seemingly unproductive war. But I also think there's a more cerebral case to be made that, we don't want to do that for another 5 years, which is that although there is upside to staying there in terms of stemming in the short run a kind of bloodbath, there's no doubt about that right now. In other words, if we pull out all our troops, lots more Iraqis die in the short run, and I'm not advocating pulling them out right now, but I more and more see the logic of some sort of systematic approach to withdrawal in the coming couple of years because there is, on a day-to-day, ongoing basis, every year we're there, there are things going on that I think are bad for American national security. There's stories about, jihadists getting kind of recruited and motivated outside of Iraq, whose main kind of target is Americans because of this war, apparently. In other words, they want to go to Iraq and kill Americans. That's what they're saying. Well, the more the rallying cry is let's kill Americans, I think the worse that is for America. And specifically, there was an article in the New York Times, I guess, about how, the jihad from Iraq, in the countries around Iraq, the jihadism is getting strengthened by people flowing out of Iraq, by jihadists flowing out of Iraq. I mean, it turns out in this Lebanon showdown inside this refugee camp, there were about 50 fighters who came from Iraq, okay? These are, I assume they have a pretty devoutly anti-American attitude, strengthened by the war in Iraq. And now, by the way, we are sending, arms and equipment to the Lebanese government so that it can face these people down. So this is another case of the kind of clash of civilizations becoming a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, thanks partly to this Iraq war. So there are these ongoing costs to American national security of the continuation of the war. And
it's interesting, when General Zinni says it's a 5 or 6 year proposition, I wonder if he's taking these factors into account.
If he's taking what?
No, I think that's a very powerful argument for why we should try to wind it up in 2 years as opposed to 6 years. But in the New York Times account of how bad a bloodbath would there be if we just left, Zinni's saying, well, everybody seems to agree, with the 1 or 2 exceptions, that it would be a pretty bad bloodbath. And Zinni said, well, it's a 5 or 6 year proposition to stabilize the situation. But I wonder if he's taken into account the fact that all those 5 or 6 years were breeding more anti-American terrorists. I agree.
And also, I think having some kind of timetable, the number of troops will be cut in half in 15 or 18 months or something, some kind of timetable forces you to actually focus on the end game and ask yourself, okay, this did not work out well. What are we doing to prepare a reasonably stable outcome here? What other regional powers do we have to talk to? What deals do we have to cut? If you have no timetable at all, I think you could just fail to ever really confront that question.
Well, but, the timetable has bad consequences, which is it tells all the bad guys we're leaving. So we sort of want to con them into thinking we might just stay for 5 or 6 years.
It does. It also could, in some ways, get Iran more interested in playing ball, because I think one of their main concerns right now is that they view a continued American presence with some justification as a threat to their own national security.
I guess, is there a way to tell Iran we're getting out without telling the Mahdi army we're getting out? I guess we can't, since Iran is now the sponsor of the Mahdi army.
Well, although on the Spencer Ackerman Eli Lake dialogue and on Blogging Heads TV, and they have both been in Iraq recently, one of them floated this story that Iran is kind of playing what was it? Some devious thing they were doing. They're kind of selling out Muqtada al-Sadr, and
in favor of scary or just in general?
Oh, I guess, yeah. But I forget the particular. I forget the concrete aspect of it. But they were calling into question how strong the bond is there. And of course, he's an interesting case because his line is, well, I'm doing what the Iraqi government is failing to do. I want to help these. I'm all for these Sunni tribesmen, revolting against Al Qaeda and signing up for the, what is ostensibly the American mission of revolting against Al Qaeda, whereas the Iraqi government does not seem to want that to proceed. That's one of the main American strategic goals right now, is to abet, the Sunni revolt against Al Qaeda, and al-Sadr is saying he's for that, and it kind of complicates our rhetorical position if we want to argue that he's a bad guy, because he's signing on to the one thing that the government won't do and that we want.
Good point. And there was the curious thing that al-Sadr always had better ties to the Sunnis, even as he was killing them in Baghdad.
Well, he's always professed this nationalist line, this pan-sectarian Iraqi nationalist line. It's just that now it's become a more salient issue because we're seeing some success on this very front of this Sunni revolt against Al-Qaeda, but the Iraqi government will not play ball.
Why don't they play ball?
I don't know. I talked to Eli about this. I think the idea is that, I was asking him, is it that they think that, look, someday the Americans are going to be gone and it's going to be Shiite versus Sunni and we don't want you giving them guns, right? I mean, it could be they just anticipate ultimately a civil war and don't want anything done to strengthen the Sunni tribesmen because they think it's going to come down to Shiite Sunni.
Right.
It may be, it's not so much that they think that there has to be a civil war. It's just that they want to run Iraq. They're the Shiites, and they want to say we're going to run Iraq and have the Sunnis either back down or fight a civil war that they will lose or something. You know.
There was some analyst at New America Foundation who said that Sadr is the only guy that can hold Iraq together, and it is what you've just said. Sort of does tend in that direction, right? He's the only Shiite who might actually have support among the Sunnis.
Well, he's a prominent Shiite who's talking that way. I have no way of knowing whether it's total nonsense or what.
My point is just that guys like Murtha have a very selfish attitude. We're losing 100 soldiers a month, which is a huge price. But if that is the price to be paid for saving hundreds of thousands of people, what if it were Darfur and we went in and lost 100 soldiers a month, saving hundreds of thousands of people? We'd probably say that was a good thing to do. And why don't we say that about Iraq, too, where we already are? If we really think we're doing good there, isn't the moral position, since we broke it and we owned it, we now own it, be that we should stick it out? Well, apart from these global terrorism concerns that you raise.
I certainly agree that the number of American soldiers dying, it's easy for me to say this, I'm not related to any of them, but number of American soldiers dying per month seems to me one of the less important of several considerations, even in terms of America's own well-being, right? If you just focus on American national interest, it seems to me that 100 a month in the scheme of things, for a few years might not amount to a lot, given the fact that it is the job of soldiers to die for their country, And
the argument is that Darfur doesn't make us the lightning rod for the world's terrorists, but Iraq does. Good argument.
I guess. Well, are you attributing it to me and saying it's good?
I say that's what you would say. That's how you would distinguish Darfur from Iraq.
Well, pending further review after I watch the videotape, I will endorse any instance of you calling a theory good and attributing it to me.
Bob, you're my guru.
I know. This Mr. Nice Guy shtick, Mickey. You've adopted this with kind of growing audacity.
It works.
I know. Acting like you're the nice, humble guy, and I'm this domineering bully, and with a short temper to boot.
I don't think you're a domineering bully.
But I have a short temper?
I don't have any flowers.
You saying I have a short temper?
You are a little excitable.
You saying I have a short temper?
You're a little excitable.
Okay. Hillary?
Hillary, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I think Hillary's always your deal.
Well, I don't think Hillary's going to make it because I think people just don't like her. That's sort of the conventional wisdom in certain circles.
I was looking at a poll. Her negatives are pretty high.
Well, it's just that look at the last debate, okay? For people who watch this is so early that basically nobody watches the debates. So they all get their information from the media. If you watch the debate, it was a bad day for Obama, but he still wiped the floor with Hillary. He's still a much more forceful, appealing figure than she is. But because it was a bad day for Obama, the press wrote, oh, bad day for Obama. So everybody thinks Obama did badly in the debate and he lost ground because of the debate. But in the fall and in the winter, when people are actually watching the debates, they're going to watch the debate, and Obama's just going to blow her away. It seems to be. I will predict that is, assuming that Gore or somebody doesn't shake it up, that's what will happen. And So these latest revelations in various books about Hillary are not much. If she really were not doomed by her unlikability, I think they might have some effect, and they're not old news, as the Clinton administration says. Basically, we know that her marriage, it seems clear that she knew all about Bill's affairs, that she was lying when she said, implied how shocked she were that he would have an affair with Monica Lewinsky, although maybe she thought she had him cornered. But it's basically, the marriage is much more of an arrangement, as is common with many marriages, than they let on, and that we knew, that she sat in on the debriefing, as it were, of some of people who alleged that Clinton had affairs with them, that she orchestrated the whole campaign against the bimbo eruptions, and that Clinton fell in love with another woman and wanted a divorce at one point.
Now wait, is this stuff that has emerged with these two new kind of Hillary tell-all books, or
yes,
not tell-all books? I mean, they're not by.
There are two books, one by Gerthen Van Atta and one by Carl Bernstein, and this has emerged from those two. Yes.
And Girth is the one who broke the Whitewater story. Without Girth, there would be no Monica scandal, right? Because if there weren't Whitewater, there wouldn't be Monica, right?
I'm not so sure.
Well, wasn't he testifying?
The Paula Jones lawsuit is what led.
Oh, Paula Jones.
What led to Monica, and Paula Jones was reacting to a story by David Brock about troopers pimping for Clinton. So that story would still be true.
What was the Starr investigation ostensibly about before he did his perjury entrapment?
Starr's investigation was about Monica, about Whitewater, but the Paula Jones thing was, I think, fairly independent of the Starr investigation.
Well, right, but if the Starr investigation hadn't happened, Monica never would have come to light. And that happened because of Whitewater, and that happened because of Girth, who wrote this book.
I thought it happened because Linda Tripp blabbed to a reporter.
Yeah, but the only reason that found manifestation is because the Starr investigation was going on.
Well, no, there's still a right-wing conspiracy against Clinton. If they got that sort of information and could trap him into perjury in the Paula Jones suit, they would have gone ahead and done that. So I don't see. It seems to me it's slightly independent of Starr.
But the perjury entrapment did happen in the context of a Whitewater investigation, right?
No, it happened. It happened in the context of a Paula Jones lawsuit. She deposed him in front of a federal judge, and he lied in front of a federal judge. That had nothing to do with Starr. It was a private lawsuit. I think, if I remember it correctly.
Okay. Well, someone will tell us if you do. You know more about these things than I do. But these books. Anyway, Jeff Girth co-wrote one of these books, former New York Times reporter. He did break the Whitewater story before Clinton was even president, by the way, while he was running. What do you think about these books? What is the story with this secret pact of ambition that one of them alleges between...
Well, I don't see what's so terrible about this having a secret pact of ambition. If you and I could have a secret pact of ambition, Bob, and we probably do, and
we don't know it,
to take over the world, I would sign on to that pact.
You're going to get to run Blogging Heads after I'm evicted by the shareholders.
Well, there you go.
But the allegation is that this is an actual document, that Hillary and Bill worked it out?
No, I don't think it's an actual document. It's a
because a alleged former girlfriend of his says she spotted the document, I think. Now, it may not have said at the top, secret pact of ambition.
I don't think there was an actual... I think she saw a reference to the secret pact, but not... I don't think there actually was a formal pact with a bar graph or who gets to be president for what terms. I don't know. It'd be such pie in the sky. Why shouldn't they do that?
I don't know.
It implies that the marriage is a bigger sham than we thought. It implies that Hillary's a bigger liar than we thought. But to some extent, the Clinton mantra of denying it until it's old news actually works, because now we find out this stuff and it seems sort of old news.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I don't get the news part. I mean, here's the Washington Post, nut graph about, in the first story about these books. This is the news from these books. The Hillary Clinton who emerges from the pages of the books comes across as a complicated, sometimes compromised figure who tolerated Bill Clinton's brazen infidelity. Yeah, I think so. Pursued her policy and political goals with methodical drive. Yeah, which is not to say successfully, and occasionally skirted along the edge of the truth along the way. Now, at the New York Times, I think a copy editor might have deleted along the edge of, so that you just wound up with, and occasionally skirted the truth along the way. But leaving that aside, so what? I mean, who doesn't kind of skirt the truth? If you take that to mean, you don't really confront the truth, but you don't quite tell a lie.
That's the sanitized, don't piss off the Clintons, Washington Post summary of it.
Oh.
The basic.
And this conspiracy is in turn tied into the Murdoch immigration thing.
No, it's just that Washington Post isn't going to say that these books show Hillary to be a bigger liar than we thought, but that's what they do. And there's a quote from Mark Fabiani that implies that she sort of...
And at what level do you think the intervention happens? Is the reporter in on the conspiracy? Because we could ask the reporter if this paragraph was edited.
Bob, I've worked at this sort of place, and you haven't. You tend to write the thing in a way that takes the edge off a bit. So if you get an advance copy of the book, probably from the Clinton camp, you write it in such a way that doesn't irrevocably seem unfair and hard-edged to the Clinton camp. You're just,
Okay, but wait. These are two separate things. You're saying it's a source, it's a reporter paying off the source who's in the Clinton camp, or you're saying at the highest levels of the Washington Post?
No, I'm saying that every reporter knows how to write this thing in a way that you get the gist of the allegations without presenting them in their hardest form. So instead of saying Hillary Clinton, probably lied, at the drop of a hat, you say she skirted the edge of the truth. That's just a natural mainstream reporter's instinct.
Well, since we're doing this one-upsmanship about whose journalistic experience is relevant, I think I've done something you've never done, which is work at a daily newspaper. And the overwhelming drive of a journalist at a daily newspaper is to get on the front page. And the way you do that is put your nut paragraph in the strongest terms that the facts will justify. That is a powerful motivation, which you've never known.
This guy was already on the front page.
What do you mean he was already on the front page? You don't know you're on the front page until the editors read your story.
He was leaked the Hillary book. It's going to get on the front page. He's not an idiot. He knows that.
I don't understand. I still don't understand I don't understand your theory here, Mickey. I mean, you have so many conspiracies going on in your head at this point. I'm getting them mixed up. But
did you know that Hillary orchestrated the campaign against the bimbos? I didn't. It was rumored, but now we know that it's true. It seems to me that's something.
Well, that is something.
Do we know that she was worried about getting indicted for perjury in the travel documents case? That's something. Do we know the extent to which she was BSing when she said it took her breath away when she found out about Monica? I mean, I guess it was sort of shocking, but at some level, it really wasn't shocking, was it? So these are all advances. There was a right-wing blog that I forget that sort of implied that Hillary had put out falsehoods in a way that I can't recall, so I don't want to make the charge right now. But
oh, please.
Okay, it was at Newsbusters. I'm looking at it right now. Okay. Blah 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 blah. Oh, here we go. Bernstein also reports that Bill Clinton, with Dick Morris's help, pressured Betsy Wright into issuing a false statement denying comments that she had made to David Marinus, a reporter for his book First in Class, in which she said Arkansas state troopers had procured women for the governor. So basically they pressured people to lie in public to other reporters. Not necessarily under oath, which is different.
Yeah.
And they obtained signed statements, presumably false, from various women saying that they hadn't had sex with Clinton when in fact they had. So I guess urging people to perjure themselves under oath, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, perjury is one thing, but when you do it under oath, I've always said that's going too far.
So, okay, well, is an affidavit under oath? I guess it is. So, lying on an affidavit, it seems to me...
So it may be possible to commit perjury without...